Ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake. Christianity, as much as culture in South Africa, is under attack. Now, it is true that the world over, white people are currently basically being pushed by the left to the second class citizen state. You look at places like the UK, for example, where the government has passed numerous laws, and government entities and government bodies are consistently passing laws that discriminate. Effectively, affirmative action, EE, and even BEE is being implemented across Europe, across the UK, against white people. These are majority white countries. So yes, the culture and the race of white people is firmly under attack. But it needs to be understood as to why. The attack largely isn't just about white people. It's also about Christianity. And when you look at the people doing the attacking, they're all atheists. They're all very, very, very misguided individuals. People who claim to be Christian and yet preach nothing of the Bible. You have churches, for example, in South Africa, like the Dutch Reformed Church, that has veered so far off the rails that I dare to say the body of the Dutch Reformed Church is the Church of Satan. That doesn't mean that every single Dutch Reformed Church is a bad church. There are some good ones here and there. But the Dutch Reformed Church has always been a state entity and a state propaganda machine. For the apartheid National Party, they were pro-apartheid. And then when they saw that the winds have changed, suddenly apartheid was bad, which it was, but it was suddenly bad, and they started preaching all the good stuff, at least what the government likes. Now, why is that the case? What is it about Christianity specifically that has pushed South Africa to the breaking point? Why is it that every single journalistic outlet fails to cover the genocide of Christians in Nigeria, in Mozambique, in most of Africa, and yet they're all covering the apparent genocide of Palestinians, even though Palestinian population has grown over the last 2 years of occupation or of the war against Palestine? Yes, they lost about 60,000 people, but if you actually understand anything about genocide, you would think that either Israel is completely incompetent in actually exercising that genocide or not. Doesn't even matter. The point is, why is that always the thing that's being pushed? Why is innocent Muslims always the ones being protected by the media, by the politicians? And why is no one saying a peep about Christianity, except when Christians start to stand up, when Christians start to form movements to push Christian nationalism to the forefront, then suddenly Christianity is all over the place. Every journalist and every media outlet is now suddenly finding their voice about Christianity and how evil and bad Christianity is. Well, a lot of it stems from this, and I'm just going to show you this to show you that the threat on Christianity in South Africa is very real. In 2018, the Commission for the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Cultural, Religious, and Linguistic Communities, or CRL Rights Commission, found this new document that they wanted to pass, which would effectively put every single church in this country under government regulation. At the time, the churches fought back hard, and eventually the government sort of gave up on the idea, with the ANC themselves saying, hold on, governing or regulating religions, that's just not something we're comfortable with. But now in 2025, it's back, right? It's back, and it's back with a vengeance. Again, the CRL has pushed for more regulation, and this time, what effectively would happen is every single church denomination would receive an oversight committee, where every single pastor would have to apply for a license with this committee. And if the pastor is deemed to be sufficiently versed in whatever the government decides they're allowed to preach, they would get this license. If not, they would lose the license, and any preaching they do would be considered illegal and most likely made a felony or a crime or massive fines or whatever the case might be. They haven't really spoken about what happens if they don't give you the license. As you can imagine, government regulating religion, that is just a very bad spot. It's not surprising. It's not surprising that dictatorships all over the world hate Christianity, because this has nothing to do with Islam. It has nothing to do with any other religion. This is aimed at Christianity specifically. If you don't believe me, just take a look at this. The Daily Maverick article that now suddenly finds its voice about Christianity, and yet the problem for them is Christian nationalism. We'll talk in a second about what exactly is Christian nationalism and why these journalists and the media houses and the left in South Africa are so deathly afraid of Christian nationalism. Fundamentally, at its core, John 3 verse 19 gives you every single... I don't even have to make a video. This verse alone tells you everything you need to know about why they hate Christianity specifically. You'll notice that Daily Maverick has never written an article about the dangers of Islam, even though you can go throughout the Middle East and you can see what Islamic countries do to people like gays. And in this article, by the way, they go on and on about Angus Buchan and how he's anti-homosexuality, he's anti-women rights. Have you been to the Middle East? Their treatment of gays is flying off the roof. If you manage to fly, you can live. Their treatment of women is beating them, and they're not allowed to drive. Daily Maverick has never said a word about Islam. But Christianity, oh, that is the problem. Never mind the fact that they live in countries where their very rights is a direct result of Christianity. Because if all men are created equal in the image of God, then that includes women, and that means that you are equal to every single man. But never mind that. Since Christianity have given you your rights, you would now like to destroy Christianity. And why do you want to destroy it? Simple. John 3, verse 19. And this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and the people loved the darkness rather than the light, because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his works should be exposed. But whoever does what is true comes to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in God. Jesus himself knew that this was going to happen. He understood it. Now, the article in question speaks about Heinz Winckler and his new 180 organization, which is sort of mirrored or built upon the Turning Point USA, where Heinz Winckler very much speaks to Christian nationalism, bringing back Christian nationalism. So let's just quickly talk about what is Christian nationalism. A lot of people hear Christian nationalism and they think, oh, theocracy. No, these are distinctly two different things. A theocracy is, generally speaking, a belief that every single law and every single rule in the Bible, including the Old Testament, must be absolutely without mercy applied to the nation. And therefore, things like killing people for homosexuality and all sorts of stuff is taken out of context, removed from the context within it is seated, and sort of applied to the situation. This is not the same as Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism understands that when Jesus came and in Jesus' preachings, he makes it clear that the law that God gave to the Israelites was for them, and that he has come to form a new covenant. This covenant would be by choice. Even the Israelites weren't allowed to force people to follow their rules. They weren't allowed to force. It was only for them. They were the only ones under that law. If a sojourner came to them, the sojourner didn't have to follow it, but then they would just tell the sojourner to leave, to not be there because they don't want to invite the wrath of God. In the New Testament, there is no force. You can look at every single apostle's life and you will find the same thing. No one was ever forced to follow Jesus. So Christian nationalism is simply this. It's the demand that our leaders profess Christ, and that every single rule that they make underpins the moral teachings of Christ, which means freedom of choice, the freedom to choose whichever faith you want, because that is enshrined in the morality of Christ, the freedom of every person to live their life as they see fit, to not be oppressive, to be a government that upholds good moral teaching and abhors evil teachings. That's the point. Right? That's the only point. That's what Christian nationalism is about. It's about returning to conservative values that have time and again demonstrated its ability to build civilizations. There is not a single civilization on this planet that has been built by liberal viewpoints, ever. It has only ever been conservatives that built societies. It has been liberals. If you look around the world, look at the UK, look at every single country in Europe, look at America prior to Trump taking over. What do liberals do? They destroy, they wreck, they tear down, because they are evil. Their entire ideology is based on the lie. This is why the vast majority of liberals are not Christian. They hate Christianity. This is why almost every single atheist is a liberal, because they hate conservatism. They hate the idea of following what worked, right? And not giving in to this temptation to just constantly change everything, adopt everything, and accept everything. Because if you're constantly doing that, it is a recipe for disaster. Christian nationalism is the idea that we return to Christ and that Christ becomes the centerfold of every decision that we make. And in that, yes, it means peace, love, and unity amongst the people who live in your nation, but it also means that you punish the guilty when they do stuff that should not be done. And it means that you show mercy to the innocent when they are victims of the crimes of the guilty. Unlike the world that we currently live in, where the guilty are oftentimes shown mercy at the expense or the punishment of the innocent. As Thomas Sowell famously said, mercy for the guilty is punishment for the innocent. And that's literally what we see every single time. But of course, the Daily Maverick does not wait to call him out in sort of weird little ways. It doesn't openly criticize Winckler's move, because it obviously understands the majority of South Africans are Christian, and therefore writing their article just full-blown scathing against Heinz Winckler and against Angus Buchan would be a really bad look for them. When they asked Winckler, and I'll get to their sort of slights against his new 180 organization, but when they asked him, why do you want to do this? He literally just said, I and those with me can see that South Africa is heading in an unhealthy and unsustainable direction. We can all see that. Morally, economically, socio-economically, politically, and educationally. The core problem is not only corruption and mismanagement, but a crisis of worldview. A drastic change of direction is necessary. And then, just this little slight in there that they throw in, where they go, Winckler also said that 180 had not received any funding related to the US or Israel. The very fact that they throw that in there, right? The very fact. Now, here's the thing. If you're a journalist, surely you would actually research this. You would investigate this. If you ask the question, hey, are you receiving funding from the US or Israel? As a journalist, you would investigate this. And I'm sure they did. They found that they're not funded by the US or by Israel, but they have to put it in there, right? That little line has to be in there just so that it sort of, puts it in people's minds. Oh, this is just Israel propaganda. Because if you're on the left, you have to hate Israel outright. My own opinion is there's plenty of things that I criticize Israel for. I think that Benjamin Netanyahu made a lot of mistakes throughout the last 2 years. I think a lot of what they did was wrong. But I can also praise a lot of the good stuff that Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel has done, like try to destroy Hamas. Pretty good, right? Defeating Hezbollah. Absolutely perfect. Let's defeat all of the extreme Islamic cults throughout the world because they don't deserve to exist. They are evil and they're a threat to humanity. But anyways, right, I can sort of remove myself from the ideology. Most people can't, and for some reason, they can't even see it. And of course, then they have to throw this bit in there. Winckler's project arrives in a context where religious conservatives are being emboldened worldwide by increasingly right-leaning Christian governments. Which governments where? You are effectively speaking only about America. And Trump is not a Christian. There are plenty of Christians in the Trump administration, but Trump himself is not a Christian. He might be there, he might be on his way there, but he has not yet arrived. So the problem here is, what Christian governments are you exactly referring to? What you're seeing, and the reason conservative Christians are being emboldened, is we've had enough. We've had enough of your evil, destroying this world, pushing this world down a path that none of us want. Selling victimhood drugs to the black populations of the world and making every single minority, including women, including children, so unhappy that female suicides are through the roof. Women are killing themselves at historical levels. It was never this bad before. Black people are celebrating the victim porn all over social media, constantly just hearkening back. I literally saw yesterday on X a 23-year-old black woman lambasting this arrest of a black person in apartheid and this movie that showed how the emotional state of this black person was. And I was like, dude, you're 23. You don't know anyone who lived during that period. What are you doing? Like, why does that matter? I don't watch movies about the First and the Second Boer War and sort of lament the suffering that my people went through. I remember it, and I read about it in school, so I remember the history of it. But I don't blame English people now for what happened back then. It was a different time. It was a different era. But black people are so addicted to victimhood that they literally consume victimhood as pornography. Right? They're addicted to it. They need victimhood. And of course, there are politicians like Julius Malema and Cyril Ramaphosa and every single leftist like Max de Pree and this bloody moron that wrote this article. They're peddling it, right? Peter Kriel, for example. I'll just quickly show you guys Peter Kriel here, right? He did this whole spiel over on X about how Christianity was brought to Africa as a way to enslave the black people. And I say, wait, what are you talking about? Christianity was brought to Africa in exactly the same way that it was brought to Europe. Europe was pagan before Christianity arrived there. Christianity was born in Jerusalem in the Middle East. And from there, it spread to Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey. And from there, after the death of Paul, it only started to spread into Upper Rome and eventually into Europe. And then it conquered Europe, not by the sword, by the word. And it is what allowed Europe to completely overtake every other civilization on Earth, right? So the idea is, if the same thing happened to Europeans that happened to black people, if Christianity was brought to Europeans the same way that it was brought to black people, why the hell would you say that black people are poor and suffering today because of Christianity, but European people are not because of Christianity? Something doesn't add up. It's not the Christianity that's the problem, it's you. It's the race peddlers that are running out of racism and now inventing new types of problems. But of course, Peter Kriel also just hates Christianity because he's a servant of darkness. He hates the light because the light exposes him. That's the whole point of the Bible. It is a mirror. And when people look into that mirror, they see the evil of their own existence and they can't handle that. It destroys them from the inside. That is why they need to destroy Christianity. And it happened all over the world, by the way. This is Matthew 10, verse 17. Beware of men, for they will deliver you over to courts and flog you in their synagogues, and you will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. When they deliver you over, do not be anxious how you ought to speak or what you ought to say, for what you are to say will be given to you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will deliver brother over to death, and the father his child, and children will rise against the parents and have them put to death, and you will be hated by all for my name's sake. Isn't that exactly what's happening? Isn't that exactly the liberal leftist worldview? Children are selling out their parents. You see videos of it all the time. These liberal left-wing college students that have completely disowned their parents, hate their parents, drag their parents in front of the world on social media. This is exactly what happens to people who serve darkness, and this is exactly why people like the Daily Maverick can't stand Christianity, because it exposes their evil. They, of course, make this whole thing about it's a huge conspiracy. Of course, as a journalistic sort of media outlet, they have investigators that could investigate this and actually provide proof, but they don't have to provide proof. As Daily Maverick recently reported, there is a concerted and well-funded global campaign underway, largely financed with US and Russian money, to restore socially conservative government policies and undermine advocacy around gender equality, abortion rights, sex education in schools, and gay marriage. You can read the article, by the way, that they reference there. They provide almost no proof, no actual evidence of this funding anywhere, except for the fact that they say it, and that somehow makes it true. And here's their particular brand of evil on full display. It shows the media in every single element, and it exposes them for what they are if you know what to look for. Here's what they had to say about Angus Buchan. The evangelist has long attracted controversy for his statements on the position of women, the ability of gay people to be changed through prayer, his calls for a Christian government, and the idea that only Jewish and Afrikaans people are in covenant with God, a view he apologized for after it was pointed out by the economic freedom fighters. All of that is a complete and utter lie. He did not apologize for the view that he holds. He apologized for people misunderstanding what he was talking about. But of course, these people are evil, so they're actively lying about it. This is the media for you. Let me tell you what Angus Buchan actually said. Everybody is welcome, as always, to our meetings, but this time the emphasis will be on the Afrikaner nation. We are going to call out to God, remembering that only 2 nations in the world have ever been in covenant with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are the Jewish people and the Afrikaans people. That is fact. That's what he said. Now, if you don't know what he's talking about, it's because you don't know your history. You see, the problem is that they think in covenant with God means that the Afrikaner nation are the only chosen people of God, as the Jews were. That's not what Angus Buchan is referring to here. He's referring literally to nations that made covenants with God. The Jews made a covenant with God. The Afrikaner at the Battle for Blood River made a covenant with God. That is why on the 16th of December, I hold a solemn day of prayer and worship, spending time with friends and fellow believers, because my ancestors bound me to a covenant with God, that we and all of our children after us will remember this day that you delivered us from the Zulu threat. That is the covenant that he's talking about. Of course, Angus Buchan is also kind of wrong here, because the American empire and the American people are another group, and that makes 3. It's the only 3 groups in the world that have ever formed a covenant with God. It is the Jews first. Then it was the Americans, I believe they were first, and then it was the Afrikaner nation. Those are the 3 that are in covenant with God. It doesn't mean they're the chosen people of God, and that's the only thing that he actually apologized for. He didn't apologize for saying it. He apologized for people not understanding what he was talking about. It doesn't exclude any other race, because if you actually know why God saved the 300 Boers at the Battle for Blood River, it wasn't because they were white. It was because they were Christian. And it was because God needed Christianity in South Africa. Thanks to their survival, the Afrikaner race was able to survive and bring Christianity to the people of South Africa. And if you actually look across the country, black people, brown people, Indian people, every single racial group that accepts Christ is better off for it. Better off for it. Every single time. The problem is atheism, liberalism, and left-wing thought. That is the issue. But I'll give you one final one. It's a bit of a long video. I do apologize. But I'll give you a final bit of evidence for what will happen to us. And you have to understand that there is no escaping it. This will happen. There's nothing we can do about it. In Revelations 2, Jesus tells John to write to the church of Pergamum. And in the church of Pergamum, he writes the following. And to the angel of the church of Pergamum write, the words of him who has the sharp, two-edged sword. I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. Yet you hold fast my name, and you did not deny my faith, even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was killed among you, where Satan dwells. Now, Pergamum specifically was the religious capital of Asia Minor. There was temples literally everywhere, and every single god known to man was worshipped there. The particular reason why a lot of Christians were super persecuted in that city was because of Caesar. You see, Caesar at this time was seen as a god, and so every single person living in Rome was forced to bow the knee and proclaim that Caesar is Lord and God. Everyone did. Every single person from every other faith absolutely did it in order to stay alive, except for the Christians. They refused outright, because to them only Christ was Lord and God. There is no other gods before me, and thou shalt have no other gods before me. And they were persecuted to hell and back. Now, the Church of Pergamum had a bunch of other problems, but fundamentally, they were persecuted and slaughtered for the name of Christ. And this will happen. This will continue to happen. We will continue to face hardship and persecution at the hands of the evil liberal elite, because they hate us. It's not that they hate us, it's that they hate themselves, because through us, they see their wickedness and their evil. Our job is to stand strong, to stand up, and that does not mean that we are pacifists. It does not mean that we simply stand back and take it. No, we are to fight for the Christian faith. And I believe that Christian nationalism not only can make a comeback in South Africa, it must. If South Africa is to survive, we have to stamp out the threat that is atheism, the threat that is extreme Islamic fundamentalism, and we have to stamp out the disease that is liberalism. And I'm not saying that we should kill people. I'm not saying that there should be bloodlust. We should do that by simply no longer being afraid to speak. Speak, say what you think, and if you carry consequences for that, so be it. Every single Christian before you faced the same consequences. Every single Christian was persecuted for standing up for Christ. It is what we're called to do. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, thank you so much for watching. Hit the like if you liked it, dislike if you didn't. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think of the persecution, the sort of just outright hatred of Christianity in South Africa and Christians more broadly. I'd love to read your thoughts. As always, massive shout out and thank you to all of the patrons as well as the YouTube channel members for continuing to support this channel and allowing me to make content like this. If you want to become a patron, link is in the description or the join button right below this video that allows me to do even more of this in the future, get some researchers, get some investigators, and actually launch my own stories that I can go and look for, because there's a lot of stuff our media simply does not cover. As always, be good to each other, be kind to each other, and I will see all of you in the next one. Peace.